Soldiers are on alert.
We are even more ready.
Arsenals are being upgraded.
We have to reinforce.
And bases expanding.
We have been very concerned about the risk for a massive attack.
The battle for sway at the top of the world is well underway. It's a battle involving the world's mightiest militaries and billions of dollars worth of resources. It will impact global trade, the climate, and potentially the world order for the next century. The Arctic is the new frontier for great power competition.
It's a very important area in a geopolitical sense, definitely.
The war in Ukraine has further increased that importance and increased fears of a boil-over.
The situation could spiral out of control.
In this Sky News special report, we hear from those readying for a possible Arctic war. We go on NATO's front line, monitoring for possible Russian threats.
My job is to make sure that we're safe.
We analyse the incredible riches and strategic advantages at stake.
And NATO has slept really over years, so they didn't realize what was going on.
And hear from the locals impacted, as well as the Russian official who issued this dire warning.
How confident are you that a conflict in the Arctic can be avoided?
No, we are not confident.
Strikingly vast and starkly distinct, the Arctic may seem like a different world. Defined by its frigid climate, with ice islands the size of nations. Its remote location and variety of locals, dangerous and endangered, make it fodder for nature films. The Arctic Circle spans 14.5 million square kilometres. That's larger than the continental United States. It encompasses 8 nations: Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, and the US. All have increased their military presence here over recent years. The United States has at least 5 military bases in Alaska and 1 in Greenland. More than a dozen Air Force, Navy and Army bases span Russia's north. The Arctic region is crucial from a geostrategic sense, given the proximity to potential foes. For Russia, this area is fundamental for its defense and nuclear deterrent.
The Arctic is of utmost importance for the Russians. Their strategic capabilities are very much stored at the Kola Peninsula, especially for their second strike capabilities, and this makes the Arctic for them a really indispensable region.
Climate change is radically reshaping the region, and not just the environment. Melting ice sheets are opening up new shipping lanes. Russia is investing billions of rubles on a northern route and connected ports. It'll dramatically reduce travel time for intercontinental ships. China is cooperating in the Arctic infrastructure build. It declared itself a near-Arctic nation, revealed an Arctic strategy, and constructed 2 icebreaker ships. And the ice melt is also revealing billions of dollars worth of oil and gas. The US Geological Survey estimates around 30% of the world's untapped gas and 13% of its oil, for so long out of reach, may soon be accessible. That's prompted fears of a race for resources. And a senior Russian official told Sky News things could get ugly.
How confident are you that a conflict in the Arctic can be avoided?
No, we are not confident. And we are not adding a single, point to making the situation aggravate. We didn't do anything. Well, we still are ready to prevent militarization of Arctic.
A strategically significant and resource-laden region, remote yet interconnected. The Arctic is crucial for the major powers, and the conditions in the frigid north put it precariously close to a boil-over. This is where things may come to a head. Finnmark province in northern Norway on the Russian border. Norwegian troops here are readying for the worst. Sky News joined major live-fire military drills. 630 troops, 100 vehicles and an artillery battery rehearse rooting out invaders.
We see that we are able to synchronize both maneuver, fires and support.
Their mock enemy isn't named, though it's obviously directed towards its dangerously unpredictable neighbour. It is a striking show of force to make it clear Russia would face an incredible fight if it dared attempt to seize this strategically important region. Roughly the size of Tasmania, bordering Russia and spanning the Barents Sea, Finnmark would be crucial for Russia to capture in any conflict. Russia's northern fleet, with its nuclear-armed submarines, are based on the nearby Kola Peninsula. Strategists suggest Moscow can't protect them, and its ability to respond in kind to a nuclear attack without taking Finnmark.
Russia need to protect the bases, what we call the bastion. So they have the bastion defense, and we think it may strengthen their bastion defense under certain circumstances to actually attack North Norway.
2 Russian brigades with 8,000 troops are also positioned just 20 kilometers from Finnmark. The Soviets threatened invasion in the Cold War, and Russia's recent record suggests an all-out attack can't be ruled out.
We have been very concerned about the risk for a massive attack from Russia. Not a potential for war between Norway and Russia spinning out of any kind of crisis in the bilateral relationship between the countries, but it's a part of a larger game. I mean, the deterrence game between, above all, the US, NATO and Russia.
Which is why Norway is bolstering its forces here. The Porsanger battalion didn't exist 4 years ago. By 2025, the northern base will be one of the biggest in the country.
In order to be able to defend Norway if it's necessary. And it's important because it's a political decision, and it's relied to the alliance, the NATO alliance, that we show that we will be able to strengthen the defense and that we are able to defend ourselves.
But some doubt that. The former head of the military is among those who believe the Arctic region's terrain is too challenging. There are too many choke points and the likely opponent too strong. He instead suggests Norwegian forces retreat behind a western mountain chain. But that's not official policy. Troops here are ready and willing to stand and fight.
Every part of Norway is of a importance, and every part of Norway is a value to protect.
This is part of a wider military build-up. 27 nations took part in this year's NATO Cold War response war games in Norway, the biggest in 40 years.
Russia has remilitarized the Arctic for 10-12 years heavily, and NATO has done almost nothing, and only recently they woke up and now they are signaling to the other side, we will be ready also, we are going to grab what we have, you know, to counter you in this area. And this is a very normal approach, and of course in the overall tension world we are living now, this is probably creating tensions, but it goes both sides.
While Russia has been reopening Cold War era Arctic bases, like this one, 900 kilometers from the North Pole. According to the US, Russia has been extending Arctic runways to accommodate nuclear bombers. Russia's also commissioned icebreaker ships and submarines to strengthen its might in northern seas.
We have some sort of spill-in effect of the geopolitical tensions into the Arctic, and this comes from the point or the fact that that the Arctic is of utmost importance for the Russians.
The US has increased Arctic patrols and this year allocated more than $175 million on new Arctic military projects. And Norway recently granted the US permission to build new facilities at 3 Norwegian airfields and a naval base.
Norway considered itself last few years, it didn't exist, it didn't happen before, not as a sovereign individual country, but a far front of NATO.
And the NATO far front has faced Russian wrath. Norwegian jets were scrambled at least 34 times last year, responding to possible Russian incursions. Russia is alleged to have carried out mock bombing runs, routinely jammed GPS signals in Norway, and to have hacked its parliament's computer systems. Moscow denies the accusations.
Put together, these sound like acts of war. Yeah, in a way you can say that. We can also see it as it's in a way demonstrating the spectrum of potential threats.
The head of Norway's leftist party told Sky News Norway's embrace of NATO and the US and its militaristic march is dangerous.
No, we don't think Norway should be as engaged in NATO as we are now. Our stance is very much against NATO. We are against Norwegian NATO membership. But the most important thing is that we are very much pro-peace and against all kinds of war, whether that be NATO's wars, the US wars, or Putin's ongoing war today. 2021 has been the year in history where humans have spent the most money on weapons, on military. So we are definitely in a kind of situation of escalation. And that happened also before the Ukraine war, before Putin's invasion. So we are in a situation where people are spending more, where we are again escalating when it comes to the military. And I think that's quite a scary thing to look at. We have a lot of crises that we have to deal with. We've just recently had a health crisis with the coronavirus. We have a lot of conflicts going on, not just in the war in Ukraine, but a lot of other conflicts. We have problems when it comes to solving global issues, when it comes to food security, climate change, bigger economic inequality. There's a lot of things that need to be dealt with, and I don't believe that the world has... We don't have time for more war. We don't have time for more escalation. We need to go the other way. Demilitarization, not more militarization.
New pieces are being added to this geopolitical chess match. Sweden and Finland, historically non-aligned, are now joining NATO.
For the Russians, this is really the nightmare coming true, and Putin wanted to have less NATO along his borders, and now he is getting much more NATO along his borders.
NATO has promised to fast-track the applications. NATO is also deploying more forces to the Baltics, its so-called eastern flank, and it's more explicitly targeted Russia in a new strategic concept.
It makes clear that Russia poses the most significant and direct threat to our security.
Russia has denounced the posturing and suggested it may beef up its northern bases.
In regard to Finland and Sweden, we don't have problems with Finland and Sweden that, unfortunately, we have with Ukraine. We have no territorial disputes with them. There's nothing that might concern us in terms of Finland and Sweden becoming NATO members. If they want to, please go ahead. But they should clearly understand that they didn't face any threats before. Now, if NATO troops and infrastructure are deployed, we will be compelled to respond in kind and create the same threats for the territories from which these threats towards us are created. It's obvious. What? Don't they understand that? Everything was going fine between us, but now there will be tensions. There certainly will. This is obvious and inevitable, I repeat, if there is a threat to us.
NATO is effectively the most powerful player in the Arctic, a far cry from the remit from its founding.
As in the State Auditorium, representatives of 12 nations of Western Europe and North America assemble for the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in 1948 to counter the Soviet Union.
This treaty is a simple document. The nations which sign it agree to abide by the peaceful principles of the United Nations, to maintain friendly relations and economic cooperation with one another, to consult together whenever the territory or independence of any of them is threatened, and to come to the aid of any one of them who may be attacked.
Despite American promises it would not expand east of a reunified Germany, NATO has now stretched to Russia's doorstep. 27 nations are now part of the alliance, whose members agree an attack on one is an attack on all. While NATO claims to exist to protect peace, its attacks on Libya, Serbia and Afghanistan have called that into question.
Today we can see that NATO does in some ways work as a defense force, for example for the Baltic countries, which are now, I think, very happy to be members of NATO. But earlier in history, you don't need to go very far back to see how NATO has worked more as an aggressor than they have as someone who's working for peace and stability.
Critics also claim NATO was deliberately provoking Russia before February's invasion of Ukraine. They point to NATO sending military trainers into Ukraine and NATO hinting at Ukraine's addition into the alliance.
Before the war started, I told Putin that if he invaded Ukraine, NATO would not only get stronger, but would get more united.
NATO is increasing in size and power, adding more members from and military assets to the Arctic. That more closely ties the fate of the region to the alliance. The Norway-Russia relationship wasn't always so frosty. A tiny town on the Norway-Russia border was a symbol for cross-border cooperation and provided hope peace can be maintained in the Arctic. In Kirkenes, reindeer have the right of way, Norwegian flags fly over front porches, and street signs are in Russian. Sports teams play in Russian leagues, and 10% of the population and a large chunk of its trade is from across the border. But lately, things here have been a little uneasy.
It's been tough for very many. We have lived in peace for many years, and now our neighbour is going to war with one of its neighbours. Of course, it has affected us all.
The war in Ukraine has challenged typically close ties. Norway's applied sanctions on Russia, which limits trade and may well sink the local shipyard. 70% of its revenue last year came from fitting Russian vessels, but Norway recently closed its ports to most types of Russian boats.
But I'm planning for the future where the Russian clients are not the major ones.
Visa-free border crossings have also been suspended, with reports residents have been stranded on the other side. This monument celebrates the Soviets liberating Kirkenes from the Nazis during World War II. 77 years later, another Russian military act has drastically impacted this border town. A local art group is attempting to keep cross-cultural cooperation alive and help Russian artists critical of their government. It's something of an artisan resistance movement.
We are looking at examples from the Stalin's repressions and at the events that were happening in other countries, and we try to learn from it.
For 2 decades, the group has been hosting Russian performers, and it doesn't want the music or connection to fade.
We believe that it's now more important than ever to keep a contact with the independent voices, with the voices that opposes the Russian regime.
Katya Korobleva fled St. Petersburg, fearing she'd be silenced.
I really cannot encompass all the horrors that are happening now in Ukraine and also with the people who are now arrested in Russia, and these are people I know.
The war in Ukraine and the rising tensions in the Arctic mean those who have been striving to bring people together and bring down barriers are left to wonder where they go from here.
We're trying now to find some answers to that.
A reliable ride and strong will are required in an Arctic region where winter snow buries trees and temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees. Though this is a geopolitical hot zone, a 200-odd kilometre stretch where Norway ends and Russia begins, effectively NATO's Arctic frontier. Private Jespersen and her team are scoping a slither of it, monitoring for illegal crossings and Russian troop movements.
I feel like I do an important job. Yeah, and I feel like I do something for my country then.
An invisible line runs between around 400 paired Russian and Norwegian markers. Norwegians are permitted to go right up to it. While a no man's land exists on the Russian side, only its soldiers are permitted here. In 1968, Soviet tanks rolled in and came within millimeters of sparking war. And there are fears in 2022, Russia may go even further.
We're saying that we are leaning a little bit more forward. We are even more ready. Since what we thought about 6 months ago, that it's not possible to have another war in Europe. Today, we are thinking that this is actually something that can happen in the close future or near future.
More troops and heavy equipment will be sent to the Heibogman Border Battalion in the coming months. adding to the 800-troop-strong force. Further north, down a road typically used by reindeer herds and quail hunters, a military outpost on 24-hour Russia watch. It is a fresh-faced front line. At just 19, leading Private Korsaith commands the Korpfjell border station. Like most in the battalion, he's serving his mandatory 15 months military service and is willing to die to repel a possible invasion.
I trust myself and I trust my patrol, and I have a lot of faith in that if something happens, we know what to do.
While most of their call-outs are to tourists straying into Russian territory, even an errant elbow cops a hefty fine, there is a massive Russian force a short distance from this post, roughly 8,000 soldiers across 2 bases, as well as the Northern Fleet and its nuclear-armed submarines.
So in that sense, we are close to a larger military power.
The Norwegian army is known for sending the best and brightest conscripts to the border to deal with the unique physical and mental challenges and apparent rising Russian threat in the Arctic.
We like to brag about being the best in the world when it comes to, as a conventional force, being able to operate in the Arctic, and that's also the Norwegian role within NATO.
Regardless of Finland's possible entry into NATO, this will remain its Arctic frontier. Things are unmistakably heating up in the frigid north. The Arctic is now a crucial theatre of competition for the great powers. Its importance will only increase. The Arctic's largest geographic presence, Russia, has thrown out the rulebook. Its invasion of Ukraine has made the situation in the Arctic even more precarious. The foreboding military build-up, the provocative rhetoric, the new players joining this geopolitical game, and the potential race for resources. It all suggests the prospect of peace in the Arctic is on thin ice.